All right, we are going to jump right in. Sorry, we don't have time for a break, but hopefully everybody can stretch sitting in their chairs and do a little chair exercise, rotate your, feet and arms, just sitting in your chair. So we are going to move on with our next presentation. We heard from our Lifetime Achievement honoree, Dr. Michael Klaper, this morning. And we also heard from Dr. Tim Radak yesterday, as he presented a nutrient review and planning guide on whole food plant-based diets. And so we are pleased to welcome both back on the stage for a duet discussion on, again, another very important topic, optimal feeding of the gut microbiota, whose central role in health are revealed more and more each year. So welcome back, both of you, and on the stage.
Let's see, getting close to 5 o'clock, which means dinner time is right around the corner. So thank you everyone for keeping the energy levels up. And it's been 15 some odd presentations. We're still going strong. So just a little bit more and then one presentation after dinner. So keep holding on there. As Paru mentioned, we're having a panel discussion on the microbiome. And just to get started, I just wanted to throw some statistics. There's been already quite a lot of discussion yesterday and today on the microbiome, and mostly the positive aspects from certain things that you can consume and have a beneficial effect systemically as well as in the gut. But just to throw out some basic stats, 70 to 80% of your immune system is located in your gut. When I went to graduate school, nobody talked about where the immune system functioning was except in the lymph nodes. And so this was a pretty surprising in terms of why the microbiome in the gut has to have so many immune system cells there. Trillions of bacteria, 15 to 36,000 species in the gut. 200 to 600 million neurons are related. So lots and lots of cells in this area. So I just wanted to start off just to kind of give a little bit of a background just in terms of what we're talking about in the gut, because it's commonly referred to as having bacteria, but there's also fungi as well as viruses in there, all circulating around. So the other thing I was just going to mention is some of the last few months, some very interesting studies have come out. We've spent plenty of time at the conference talking about type 2 diabetes, but I did want to mention this recent study that just came out that looked at the metabolites that come from fiber intake as they cross into the bloodstream. Because it's already well known that if you have significant fiber intake, we have a reduction in type 2 diabetes. But what this study was trying to identify is what bacteria are responsible for that. And they were able to identify 154 microbial associated metabolites that were associated with fiber intake, all helping to reduce the risk of diabetes. So we knew that there was an association, and now we're getting closer to identifying why there's an association. So I thought that was kind of an interesting study.
Well, the microbiome is remarkable on so many levels. It's been there all along. It's inside each of us. It's like this invisible creature that's living within our bodies, that does things for us that the more you look, the more you see that it does. It makes vitamins, it breaks down fiber, it nourishes the gut wall, detoxifies harmful substances. And there's, as you probably heard the statistic, there's more bacterial cells in your body than you have somatic cells. We're 10 to 1 microbes based on just the sheer density of all these organisms inside our gut. And it doesn't ask much of us. And in some ways, it's a remarkable reflection. It's a bit magical, but it's a reflection of ourselves in its health and its disease states. And what I mean by that is all it asks from us in exchange for doing all these wonderful services is to treat it like we would treat ourselves. It wants to be fed a healthy, whole food, high fiber, plant-based diet. It wants to be taken out for a walk every day. It benefits from a good night's sleep. It wants to be free of alcohol and toxins. It doesn't want lead or arsenic coming down in the food stream. And it it would like to be free of stress hormones, etc., upset it, and inflammation upsets it, and alters the bacterial balance. And these are all the things that we want to do for our body. And our microbiome is this parallel creature that responds invisibly, but quite in the same way. And if we really unbalance it, if you eat a diet full of sugars and meats and oils, you're going to distort the microbiome, and it's going to put out inflammatory substances. It's going to injure the gut wall that is holding it, and it'll increase intestinal permeability. That's going to open the door to autoimmune diseases. The more you abuse it, the more deranged its function and the more diseases it spawn. So it doesn't ask much from us. It lives quietly and mostly in our colon, and it just asks to be fed the things that we want to feed our whole body, and don't abuse it. And we'll live long, healthy lives in harmony with this invisible creature hiding in plain sight. As Dr. Radak sent me some studies, it's almost like fractals in mathematics. The closer you look, the more it breaks up into smaller and smaller pieces. And the same thing with the microbiome. The more we look from various points of view, the more it tells us about its nature. And one study that really caught my eye was the neuroinflammatory properties of a deranged microbiome in regard to Alzheimer's disease. And there are up to this point, most of the focus on the etiology of Alzheimer's has to do with amyloid proteins forming these neurofibrillary tangles in the brain, et cetera. And so all the focus is on what might be precipitating these proteins in the brain. Well, guess what? It turns out that in the deranged microbiome that's been fed too much meat and sugar, the bacteria that are then spawned down there create beta amyloid that gets absorbed by the macrophages that then make the gut leaky and find their way up to the brain. Whoever thought that Alzheimer's that beta amyloid might be originating in the gut from a deranged microbiome? Duh. And all the more reason to eat your veggies and eat your lentils and beans and fruits and vegetables. But when we're talking about Alzheimer's, and yes, you have to take care of your blood vessels and hold down the inflammation, et cetera. But again, all the more reason to feed your microbiome creatures what they're looking for. Doesn't mean taking handfuls of probiotics. We'll talk about that. But again, those microbes thrive on the high fiber, whole food carbohydrates and proteins that are in a whole food plant-based diet. So be good to yourself, and you'll be good to your microbiome, and you won't get nasty letters from it at the end of the year.
It's a wonderful study. You know, Hippocrates said several thousand years ago that all disease begins in the gut. So it's just not do no harm. There's another really good mantra there. And he probably wasn't predicting when he said that microplastics were going to be an issue. And so we've heard that topic several times this weekend. And there's some interesting research that just came out actually estimating that in total, in an average year, the average American consumes 50 plastic bags worth of microplastic pollution. from food every year. There's also dermal absorption. There's a lot of cosmetics and things like that, skin creams that people apply, and actually microplastic particles are being transferred through the dermal layer. But we're looking at things like beverages, condiments, honey, meat, absolutely seafood, and vegetables. So, this is very, very new research that's starting to show how we can quantify where these microplastics are coming from. There is a little bit of research to suggest that the tight junctions, this destabilizes the gut area, starts to create more of a permeability for leaky gut. So microplastics, I don't see any good coming out of that one. The other thing is sodium. We all know that there's a relationship between sodium and it starts with blood and ends with pressure. Okay, it's time for dinner. So yeah, sodium increases blood pressure, but what it actually does in the gut to your healthy microbes is actually poison them. So, sodium is actually toxic, in terms of poisoning and creating metabolites that actually are increasing blood pressure as a result through the mucosal barrier. So that's something that I thought was pretty interesting, that, we already know what sodium does from blood pressure standpoint, but we don't know all the factors that lead to that. So that was kind of an interesting one.
The more I read about microplastics, the more concerned I get, and concerned is an understatement. They're everywhere. And I can't escape the analogy of ancient Rome, where the upper level folks who could afford wine wind up poisoning themselves because they stored and drank the wine out of lead-lined containers and had lead pipes coming to their house. And as they were toasting each other at the bacchanals and drinking all this wine, they were giving themselves lead poisoning, and they were doing it to themselves from something that was in their environment. And here we are 2,000 years later, and I'm wondering if we're not doing the same thing to ourselves with these microplastics. The microplastics, again, they're the breakdowns of all the plastic forks and cups and everything that we're consuming and throwing away. There is no away, and we are learning that one the hard way. But as these and you see them under a microscope, they have problems associated with them. And one of which is that there can be pesticides and molecules on the surface of the microplastic. So it acts as a time-release capsule and releases the toxins around the surface of the microplastic. But the microplastic itself is toxic, the polyethylene, et cetera. And they are finding now, well, all of us who took anatomy, you remember about the portal venous system. They're around your intestinal tract. There's this plexus, this spider web of veins that absorbs the nutrients, and they join together into larger and larger veins until they finally form the portal vein and zip up to the liver, which is just where you want your nutrients going. You want to ship the nutrients in your food up to the master chemist so it can assemble your proteins. Well, guess what else rides that portal venous express? Now, these microplastics, and they get absorbed and they go up the gut-liver axis express there. And now we're finding liver toxicity from these microplastics, and it inhibits the liver's ability to detoxify bile acids and cholesterol, et cetera. And we're poisoning ourselves from the inside here. And so Dr. Hashmi, went through his house and, much to his horror, saw all the plastics there. I'm sure all of us have the same situation there. So do what you can do to minimize the amount of plastics you're exposed to. You drink out of glass bottles, and the less you throw away, because again, there is no way that every fork, every cup is going to turn into this powdery stuff within 5 years, 10 years out in the landfill, out on in the recycling containers there. And we really need to move away from this. Plastic needs to be 100%. This should all be made out of cornstarch and bamboo fibers and
Potato.
things, potatoes. We need to really retool our entire civilization as far as the use of plastics. It should only be made into things that can be melted down and reused again. But anyway, be concerned about plastics and minimize your exposure to them. And let's hear it for glass bottles.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good segue, Dr. Klaper, to talk a little bit about ultra-processed foods. There's been that discussion over this weekend too, and there's a clear connection associated with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. And some of these are due to the additives, emulsifiers, and stabilizers that are in ultra-processed foods. Just create this low-grade inflammation. But the other thing is that some of these emulsifiers, there's one called polysorbate 80, actually cause the absorption of a toxic chemical called phthalate, which is a plastic contaminant that's in food packaging. So if you have an ultra-processed food, and there was food packaging that was associated with that, this is going into your gut and affecting gut membrane continuity and permeability. So another insult. So we've just identified a half dozen kind of insults that are relatively newly discovered, in terms of association. So my heart goes out to my gut, right? I mean, there's there's literally so much of a battle going on based on the external environment that it's no wonder why some of these things are crossing over the epithelial layer and creating antigen responses. And we're seeing associations with autoimmune diseases. So this is, unfortunately, I mean, I wish there was some great reversal on that, but, we're a society that's dominated on petroleum, right? So not just from a fossil fuel standpoint, but from also creating plastics. And so that has to be shifted in order for these types of things to not affect us in the microbiota.
Questions, comments?
Thoughts?
So, we had this beautiful spinach and mixed salads, but what do they come in? A plastic clamshell. I guess that's what they're called. Is there any way we can get California or whoever's doing all that? Because it keeps better. It doesn't spoil. If it's a head, it will spoil faster, I guess. So I guess my health food store sells heads of lettuce and bunches of spinach. But most of the stores are selling it in those
Clamshell.
boxes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what can we do?
Boy, you're making the best case ever for local food production. You just says it right there. One of the famous organic salad, Organic Girl is one of the big companies that produces, in winter, they go to Arizona and produce their salad greens. When the weather is better, they go to California. And they know that that's an issue. So they try to at least use recycled plastic. Not going to help your gut. Your gut doesn't really care, but at least the environment might care about that. And then they offer suggestions that you could turn it into a planter and grow things. And I thought, wait a second, we've got some plastic absorption going on here. Maybe that's not a good idea either. So yeah, keep it local if possible. We're seeing things like vertical growing systems now. Hydroponic. There's all types of interesting. I was at an airport and they showcased hydroponic vegetables growing at the airport. So there's no plastic with that, but your point is a good one.
We need to use our power as consumers. When I grew up, there used to be lead in gasoline. Now, there used to be tetraethyl lead in gasoline. And when they realized what it was doing to the IQ of the kids living near the freeways also, they got the lead out, and it can be done. And we can get the plastic out if the president of every one of these companies purveying their product, whatever it is, especially the food products, in a plastic container, if the president of that company gets 500 letters on his desk from angry parents saying, use something else besides plastic for your product, or we're not going to buy it. and just bushels of letters come in. Eventually, they'll get the idea, and then whoop, we found that it can be made out of corn stalks, can be made out of potatoes, and it'll happen. But we got to ask and you shall receive, and we need to do it here. This stuff is killing us and our kids.
Yep, the same thing with arsenic, that was the same thing. Or even look at BPA, bisphenol, this cancer causing compound that made things being better preserved in canned goods. Well, enough consumers said, we don't want that in our water bottles and we don't want that in our canned products. And so that actually started to change. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, if you're a dog food lover here or a cat food lover, guess what? I could not find a single can. As much as we love those creatures, these companies are still using BPA with every canned pet food produced. And so write letters to Purina, write letters and say that this is something that you're concerned about. Your pet is part of your family. Why, shorten their lives by having these kinds of additives that literally cost a penny extra to use the alternative, so question.
I was actually just going to mention, because we were talking about plastic and lettuces and things like that. I actually did look into hydroponics. That's something that I've kind of become a new hobby of mine, because there are simple methods. One that I would specifically mention in case anyone's interested is called the Kratky method, which involves growing lettuce from like a single container. So you're not having to rechange the nutrient solution that's in it. But anyway, if anybody's interested in it, you can grow lettuce at home and not have to use any plastic.
That's a great suggestion. Look at styrofoam. Styrofoam used to be, used in everything, and it's much less used. And so, drive your decisions with the power of your money and your spending, right?
Lest we make everybody paranoid here about their lettuce in their fridge back there. If you get a head of lettuce in a container with a plastic lid on it, nice, new and shiny, I think the exposure of microplastics in that head of lettuce is probably zip, or it's not shedding off new plastic. It's what happens to that plastic when you're through with it, that it goes to the landfill or sits on the side of the road, and the ultraviolet light from the sun beats down and it fragments, and after 5 years or so, it's this microplastic dust that gets into everybody's bodies there. It's what happens to that. So the new plastic is probably, quote, safe, but it still shouldn't be there because it doesn't stay in that form for very long. So we still shouldn't be wrapping our food in it, but it probably doesn't pose an immediate threat to you. It poses a threat to your grandkids. That very same container will be around. It's going to outlast everybody in this room. Every plastic cup you're using here is going to be on this earth more than any of us in this room are going to be here. And we need to take that into our awareness as we pay our good hard-earned money for containers.
It really makes me think of in the 70s and 80s, there was this huge push to go away from glass and the convenience of plastic. And so, Glad and all these other companies started producing these, for the kitchen, all these plastic containers. And what did we do? You knew something was happening when you tried to put your marinara and spaghetti in the microwave and your plastic container came out orange, right? So there's leaching going on too. So there's been several studies that show that that's probably not a good idea to use plastic, especially anything that's bendable with a food product in it, and microwave it.
Another comment here. People have been concerned about this herbicide called glyphosate, called Roundup. And it's really pervasive. It's used on all sorts of crops, mostly corn and soybeans that are fed to feed animals. What's the problem with glyphosate? The Monsanto chemists were trumpeted it loud and long, saying, "Listen, everybody, relax. What glyphosate does it inhibits the shikimate pathway, which is what plants use to assemble the amino acids that have phenyl rings, phenylalanine, tyrosine. It blocks the enzyme that the plants use to create these amino acids, which are essential for the plant's life. If you block that enzyme, then the plants can't make those amino acids and they die. And so they say, don't worry, because mammals don't use that pathway. We are immune from that. You can drink this stuff. You'll be just fine, not to worry about it. The problem is it's true that our mammalian bodies do not use the shikimate pathway. We do not make these aromatic amino acids. But guess what? Your microbiome organisms are mostly from the plant kingdom, and they absolutely use that shikimate pathway to make all sorts of amino acids and vitamins that have phenyl groups attached to them. The Roundup certainly inhibits that vital function down in your gut there. And so, again, all the more reason to pay the extra buck for the organic veggies that have hopefully not been grown with glyphosate. And any local action you can take to put pressure on the folks not to use that stuff is the better. But that's one of the problems with the glyphosate. Don't let them say, don't worry, mammals don't have to worry about this stuff. Your microbiome is very worried about it.
As if you didn't need another reason not to buy shares of Monsanto. You know, the studies that started to come up looking at the increased risk for cancer with that was done in migrant workers that were at these fields while this was being sprayed. And their answer was, well, the average American is not going to get exposed as much. And so therefore, there's no cause for alarm. I mean, horrible.
In biology, in any complex natural system, remember this, you can't do one thing. Can't do one thing. Everything sets off cascades of reactions. As a physician, I'm going to give this child an antibiotic to cure your infection. Yay. That's what you think you're doing, doctor. But you're also changing the balance down in the microbiome. That's going to change the gut permeability. That's going to allow food proteins to leak in the child's gut and make his asthma worse. You can't do one thing in the body. Well, when you start messing around with the microbiome or gut permeability, et cetera, everything sets off cascades of reactions. Do not be lulled to sleep by folks saying it just does this, it just does that. Nothing just does one thing.
Should there be any concerns about growing our patio plants in plastic containers?
Which kind of plants?
Any kind of
Like our
garden
patio
or
herbs
like
and our tomatoes and our eggplants and
growing them in a
just
plastic
in plastic
container.
containers.
I
Should
mean,
there be any concerns?
You're
for
going to
that?
water that soil is going to be moist. It's going to be right next to that plastic container. And if it's soft plastic, I wouldn't use it. If it's really hard plastic, maybe there's less leaching, of whatever microplastic might be transferred, but I haven't seen any research looking into that yet.
You might want to line it with
Line it
Terracotta,
with something.
Go terracotta.
Terracotta, yeah.
Can't
that
beat
would be better.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
good
you.
question.
Well, this is a really fun topic. And I have
Yeah,
like
we're really getting
30,000.
Debbie Downers, aren't we?
Yeah.
I got some. Good
No,
stuff coming.
I wanted to kind of shift to, I think a fun segue. One is, as we're talking as healthcare providers about empowering communities, I think this is a great place to start the conversation of local food and really not just purchasing local food, but getting our communities to grow local food. And that's for the next conference. I'm hoping to have that conversation because it's very powerful. And there's room for it, even in our urban locations, but for sure in all of the countries.
Start with growing peas in a pod.
That's right.
Yeah.
So my first question is about organic grains. So I live in a part of the country we're fortunate because we have a lot of growing area and we're growing organic grains. And I'm wondering, because I hear so much about gluten-free, and I've talked my sourdough maker into making gluten-free organic bread, but I'm curious what your thoughts are about gluten insensitivity and possibly glyphosate and other herbicides that are used in processing wheat products.
I could start by my opinion on the gluten situation, and I don't know what the effect of glyphosate has on it, but there's been several studies that look at those that have a gluten intolerance. It may not be gluten as the culprit. You've got a leaky gut from all of the insults that we've just described in the gut. And that conveniently crosses over and becomes an antigen, and you've got a flare up and you have an immune response. And some of the studies that look at those that have gluten intolerance, when they get off gluten, they do better. But that's probably because all of the processed foods and junk foods that are creating an unhealthy microbiome actually went out because they have gluten or wheat in them. So I don't think gluten is as much as a culprit as people believe. There are absolute select exceptions to this: celiac disease, sprue, and there are established Crohn's disease. I mean, there are triggers, right? But I think when this whole movement started about 10 years ago for, gluten sensitivity, I think that was actually more of a harbinger or a little bit of a flag that says your microbiome is needing attention. We've got dysbiosis going on, but I don't know the glyphosate connection.
That was very well answered. He had all the bases there, basically, about gluten. Is the concern is largely overblown, but if you've got it, you really should avoid it if you've got gluten sensitivity. The glyphosate, I'm out of the agriculture world, but I'm told that glyphosate is sprayed on feed grains right at the end as a drying agent. And is that the best they could do for drying agent? How about the sun? How about hot air? It seems to be a strange thing to use it for. And all the more reason, I'm told, similar, I had a question about tofu. Is it contaminated? And I'm told that if it says USDA organic, it by definition is not, there's no GMO in it and no pesticides, etc. I'm hoping the same thing goes for organic. If it says USDA organic on the grain product, that there isn't glyphosate in it, there's no GMO, etc. So let's support our organic farmers, pay the extra buck for the organic produce. I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more quick question about fermented foods that are really salty, but supposedly really good for, probiotics and the gut. What's your thought on that?
Well, Dr. Greger, where I get 90% of my information from, he did a study taking a look at or reviewed a study that looked at kimchi, which is, when you ferment cabbage, you're using a lot of salt in there. So presumably you would expect blood pressure to increase, but all of the compounds, the phytonutrients and phytochemicals and fermentation actually resulted in no increase in blood pressure. So it kind of like neutralized the effect of a sodium product. And the same goes with miso, another fermented soy product. So, those are rare exceptions, where you can have something, I think, that's sodium based and still get away with it. So that'd be my take on that.
And don't eat that much of the stuff.
It's a condiment.
It's a condiment.
All right, we have one online comment that says, I sing the praises of sprouting in glass jars with my WIT clients. So that's hyperlocal, right in your own
Yeah.
window.
Kitchen counter.
Good point.
I have a gluten sensitivity, an inflammatory response, but there is a pizza parlor in Wilmington that gets 80% of their product from Italy. I have no reaction to their pizza.
They get it from England, you say?
Italy.
From where?
Italy.
Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. But nowadays they got pizza crust made out of cauliflower and quinoa, non-glutinous grains. And so seek and you shall find.
Yeah. When the gluten thing came out about a decade ago, I thought, oh my gosh, Italy, you're going to collapse. I mean, the pasta country. I mean, to think about the marketing situation fiasco, but it turned out not to be as bad. They use different types of wheat there. We tend to use a hard winter wheat here that's very, very high in gluten. So maybe you're less of a reaction to the pizza from the Italian. Maybe just because the type of wheat is different there. We're also, I mean, we're the GMO capital. I mean, in terms of agriculture around the world, you know, we are the food basket, but we're producing food that's heavily chemicalized. So, you know, that the responses over in the European Commission, they're much more conservative about what they want to allow or ban. So next PPOD conference, Europe, let's do it.
Another comment online that says, processed foods labels that are labeled gluten-free have a misplaced health halo. And kimchi and stomach cancer, at least in large amounts on a consistent basis. It's a comment, but do you want to say anything about that?
I don't know. Is that really a question or is that just
It was a comment.
okay? Can I say no comment?
Yes, you may. Does the
It's
wheat
5 o'clock, so-
in Italy have glyphosate? Another one.
Do they? don't know.
I don't know. I hope they don't.
When I looked at this some years ago, I thought the European Commission banned that. And that was the one distinction between the US and Europe. And like I was just mentioning, there are a lot of chemicals that we allow, particularly preservatives and additives over here, that the European Commission says no to outright. So my guess, if I had to take a guess at it, it's probably not used over there. So,
And we're rounding up in our time. So do you have final comments?
thank you, everyone, for maintaining your interest.
Indeed.
And,
Be
yeah,
kind, be good to your microbiome. It'll be good to you.
yeah. Thank you.
All right. The big round of applause. Thank you so much.